If people could put themselves on mute, that would be good. Okay, Betty, I'm going to start now. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you,
Perfect.
Paddy.
Okay,
Welcome.
great. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for the invitation, Betty, to come back and talk about interviewing. Um, Myself and Elena really enjoyed last week's session. Elena and I were chatting afterwards, and we felt really energized by it. It's really great to be able to take what we're learning, what Lena's learning in her work, and what I'm learning through my work in Trinity College, and be able to bring it into other organizations and institutions. And Elena and I are actually about to publish a paper together, hopefully in the next month or so. It's that second stage review. So we are writing and publishing together, and we're lecturing together too. So we've developed a really good working relationship. So hopefully that will continue for a long time. So yeah, today's talk, I wanted to try and add something a little bit different. I can go through things like the STAR method, and Betty, you mentioned that, and we can talk about that. But I'd also like to give a little bit more background information to interviewing, to just give you sort of a context around why things like soft skills and transferable skills are so important for any job you're going for. Um, so just a quick summary of me. I have about 15 years experience in career guidance and recruitment. I'm currently a career consultant and guidance counselor and coach for the MBA and MSc students at Trinity College and the business school. So I work with MBA students mostly now, and these would be people with quite a lot of experience. They'd be executive level people, senior managers, very successful people. We even have a couple of Olympic medalists in our MBA this year. They really do challenge me to be able to help them, because they're very experienced. But what's been really interesting working with MBAs is that they struggle with all the same problems that I noticed with people, say, when I was working in a Northside partnership. So people who were long-term unemployed or had been away from work for a long time and trying to get back into it. Honestly, MBAs had the same anxieties, the same insecurities. So that was the real interesting thing for me moving from the Northside Partnership to Trinity College, was just how consistent people are and feeling like, oh, am I good enough? So that's just something I wanted to say early on. I've also published articles in journals, so I write on issues, all things relating to psychology and career decision making. So that's something I enjoy doing. As I mentioned, I've published a paper, or about to publish a paper, with Lena, who joined us last week. So what am I going to talk about today? I just want to tell you straight up so you know what's to come up. I'm going to talk about the science of career success. There's some great work by brilliant psychologists and neuroscientists in the last couple of decades on what are actually the key things to be successful in your work over the course of many years. I'll look at some of the most popular interview questions. I'll also suggest a few questions that you can ask the interviewer at the end of an interview, because I find a lot of the time people get stuck there. They don't know what to ask at the end of an interview. And then I'll talk a little bit about the science of how you prepare for interviews, just how you can create a habit around practicing for interviews. And we'll do questions and answers. I'll try and keep this presentation as short as possible, because, Betty, I'd like to give people the opportunity to pop in with questions, and please feel free to do so during the course of the talk. I mentioned earlier on about how common it is to see people across all levels of their career struggling with this sense of that, am I good enough? We did a survey of the MBAs this year, and to see what their biggest concerns was, and this was what came up. It's a term called the imposter syndrome. If you haven't heard of it before, it's basically meaning that a feeling that I don't belong here. I'm not as good as the rest of them. And we were a bit surprised, because the MBAs, as I mentioned, are they're successful people, But that was the biggest concern they had, that they felt privately that everyone else in the class on the MBA program is stronger than me. Um, so that really took us by surprise, because you wouldn't think that amongst MBAs. But this is the important message here, is just to state that, and I have this problem too, where like when I do 2.5 hour lectures with the MBAs, and I think, why would they listen to me? Like, these people are very successful. What do I have to offer? So I struggle with this as well. But the important point to put across is that everyone struggles with this idea of, oh, there's going to be so many other people interviewing for this job. There's going to be so many other great candidates. Why would they pick me? The important thing is to realize that you're not alone. Literally everyone has this issue. And even the people on the MBA program, you look at their CV and you think, why would they struggle with this problem? But they do. So the important thing is to understand is you're not alone. So I mentioned the success of the science behind, success in your work, in your career, and some brilliant work by psychologists like Dr. Carol Dweck. She spent decades looking at what it means to be successful, and she wrote a book called The Growth Mindset. And what she discovered is people with a growth mindset are they're happy making mistakes. They understand that making mistakes is all part of growing and ultimately being successful. What she found is a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to avoid making mistakes, and I was certainly one of these people. So we spend a lot of our mental energy trying to avoid making mistakes. And this leads to kind of a type of perfectionist thinking, where if I get something wrong, it's a disaster. And she says that careers stagnate because we're trying to avoid making mistakes, and then we're not learning. So what happens when we have a fixed mindset is we don't put ourselves in positions to learn. We avoid challenging ourselves because we're trying to avoid making mistakes. That's our entire mission, and that's when you're not growing. So when you're engaging in this interview process and you're going to an interview and you come out of the interview and you think, oh, that didn't go so well, remember growth mindset. It's an opportunity to learn. So you come out of the interview, you talk to Betty or whoever is supporting you in the job hunting process, and you tell them, this is what went well, this is what did not go so well, and you look for ways to improve. So just remember, growth mindset throughout the interview process is key. Don't see mistakes as a problem. They're just opportunities to learn. And I love this quote by Michael Jordan. It perfectly describes the growth mindset. He says here, I have missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. And that's a perfect illustration of what interviewing is actually all about. I get the MSc students to start interviewing in the year as quickly as possible, because I tell them, look, go to interviews, make mistakes, come out, let's do a debrief, see what questions came up and what questions you felt you handled well, what you felt you could have handled better, and let's see what we can do for next time. So what I'd say is, put yourself out there as soon as possible. Don't avoid doing interviews. Just start going to them as soon as you can, and just see it as an opportunity to learn. The other really important thing to think about and keep in mind when you're moving through this interview process is the work of Dr. Angela Duckworth. She did a brilliant TED talk around her research, and what she discovered is that people who are successful over the long term, they all show a similar trait, and she calls this grit. Grit is a determination to just continuously make the effort. And she finds that people who do this achieve long-term goals. So, and grit is not related to IQ. Grit is just a determination to just keep going. And in my experience, when you combine this idea of grit, just persevering, getting up each day and trying again, with a growth mindset, which is a determination to learn from your mistakes and to see mistakes as just bedded into the cake, baked into the cake of success. That's the definition of success. That's what's going to get you where you need to go. So just remember, grit, growth mindset. They're the two really important qualities that you need to bring to your interviewing, and that will get you the results. It doesn't happen immediately, but the results will start to come. Betty, just coming back to what we discussed there about transferable skills, I think that this survey is really interesting. So I'm a member of the Academy for Higher Education Career Consultants. And in 2020, we sent a survey to over 200 employers in Ireland. These were multinational companies, the national companies, and also small to medium enterprises. So across all industries. And we asked them very simply, what do you look for in candidates when you're interviewing, when you're looking to hire? And here is 18 things that they listed as being very important to them. So let's just look through them quickly before I talk about them. So you see here on the left, we have positive attitude, ability to cope with pressure, open to new ideas, looking for opportunities to learn, reliable, is able to listen to deepen understanding. So listening skills, very important. Someone who works well in teams, has leadership skills, can adapt to cultural settings. And on the right, we have analytical thinking. So, thinking outside the box, someone who's self-motivated, flexible, comfortable with complex situations, creativity. And then in bold, I've got qualifications, commercial awareness, so knowledge of the industry, IT skills, and languages. So what's really interesting about these 18 skills is that only 4 of them, the last 4 mentioned, they're the ones that we tend to get really worried about. Oh, do I have enough qualifications? Do I have enough commercial experience? Do I have technical skills? Do I have strong enough IT skills? And languages may or may not feature. But if you look at those last 4 things, that's a very small percentage of what really they're looking for. What they're actually looking for are all of these other things that come from life experience, like having the right attitude, coping with pressure, being reliable, being self-motivated. These are all things that are transferable skills that you learn through life. They are what we often call emotional intelligence, being self-aware and being able to build relationships with other people. Qualifications and commercial awareness and IT skills are actually not nearly as important as all of these other skills. So anything in your life that has helped you develop, say, an ability to cope with pressure or to be reliable or to work well in teams, anything that you've done that has helped you develop those skills, you can talk about in an interview. I talk to employers every day, and I spent the last 5 years asking them, what do you look for? What do you look for? I could put up hundreds of quotes from employers, from hiring managers, directors, and they all say the same thing. When it comes to hiring, what you need is someone who understands why they are there. They can actually sort of explain why they want to work for that company, why they want to work in that job. They have a strong argument behind that, which indicates that they are motivated, that they're motivated to work in that job. And then the other thing they say is that they show that they know how to build relationships with people. That's why they ask questions like, how do you manage conflict? They want to see that you understand how to work well with people when under pressure. But if they find someone who has motivation and an ability to work well with other people, that is the basis of the pyramid. That's where you can build everything on top of that. Without those soft skills, it's very, very hard for a line manager to make you motivated. It's hard for a line manager to make you good at working with other people. That takes time. It's hard to train that. And what's much easier is if you have someone who's motivated, willing to learn, and looks to get on well with other people, it's so much easier to train them on technical things, to teach them about the industry, It's so much easier because they have the right mindset. They have the growth mindset. They have grit. They're determined. So it's easy to train on the technical things once you have those qualities. So yeah, so just really, that's very important to keep in mind. Okay, so what are the most common interview questions? Before I just say that, a quick word on technical questions. I think it's very important to understand that when you're asked a technical question in an interview, you either know the answer or you don't. If they say, "Are you strong on Excel?" and you say, "Well, I'm okay," and they start asking you questions about Excel, answer the questions you know, and if you don't know a technical question, simply state, I haven't studied that or I haven't used it in the past, but I'd be very interested to learn it. It's best just to be very clear about what you know in terms of your technical skills, because they will appreciate you just being honest and direct. They'll appreciate you telling them exactly where you're at with your technical ability, so they'll know what training and upskilling you'll need. So really, with technical questions, it's quite simple. Just tell them exactly what you do and don't know. I think another really important point as well is this idea of being authentic. You hear that saying very often, just be yourself, and it's kind of like we all kind of sick of hearing that. But what I find the biggest problem for a lot of the people I coach going into interviews is that they're kind of afraid to be authentic. They're afraid to just sort of tell the interviewers who they really are. Um, they feel like they should give answers to questions that the interviewer wants to hear, and they avoid um, giving answers that feel real to them. And I think that's a missed opportunity. I think when you're asked questions, um, you're asked a question like, tell me tell me about a time that you failed. I really do ask the people I work with to think of an example that you can really connect with, that you think back to a time in your life when you failed and you think, yeah, that was a difficult one. That was a failure, which I learned a lot from. More often than not, that is the best example to use because it comes across as authentic in the interview. The interviewer can get a real sense that you're being true about your experience. So I think being authentic is the most important thing when interviewing. It comes across really well in an interview. And yesterday, day before yesterday, I was preparing an MBA student for an interview, and we spent an hour and 20 minutes preparing for this interview. And what we discovered was that she really was having a hard time being honest, being authentic. She was using examples that didn't really resonate with her. She was focusing on her weaknesses and not her strengths because, again, she didn't really think that her strengths were that important. What she didn't understand was that she was talking about the technical side of things in interviews. She didn't realize that she's an amazing people person. She was going for project management roles, and what she wasn't really focusing on was her strengths. And her strengths are an ability to build relationships with people. She's amazing at helping people understand the value of doing things. She's very good at listening and understanding people's concerns and anxieties. But she wasn't talking to her strengths. She was just focusing on things that she felt she should talk about. So we worked really, really hard on getting her to just be authentic, talk about the things that she's good at, that she's interested in, that she's passionate about. And she emailed me then yesterday just to say that she had a screening call with a recruiter for a program manager role. And she said here, the role seems quite interesting. And I added all that who I really am bit to my replies, and it worked perfectly. So she really focused on who she really was, and it worked really well for her. She said, I felt more confident and I was being so authentic that I didn't have to fake any answers. I said what I wanted and it felt real, and I got good feedback from the recruiter already. So the important thing here is think about examples to questions that feel real to you, that feel genuine, that you can really connect with, and that will come across really well in the interview. And it will also give you a sense of confidence. When you're talking from a position of this is real to me, it's much easier to be convincing because you're being honest with yourself, and it comes across in an interview, and your confidence will stay higher because of that. So I hope that makes sense. Um, and then just quickly, I mentioned these are the most common questions that come up. And again, this is based on 5 years of research. I actually we have a database of all the questions that employers ask, which we've been building up over the last couple of years. And I did an analysis a while back to see what were the most common questions, and these are the ones that came up time and time again. So they are, why do you want to work for us? Why are you interested in this position? Give an example of how you build relationships. Tell me about a time you failed and what did you learn? How would you approach changing a colleague's opinion? Tell me about a time you had to meet a tight deadline. What are your strengths and weaknesses, and what motivates you? So you can see here, it's very much an emphasis on the soft skills. How do you stay motivated, and how do you build relationships? But you'll always be asked that question, why do you want to work for us? That almost always comes up. And what I say to people with that question is that when you're looking at the company, ask yourself, what is it that I really can, again, connect with? What is it about that company that I am genuinely interested in? Now, I think you can get information around that off the website. If they're a big company, they might be in the news. You can see interviews maybe with people from the company, directors in newspapers might be interviewed. But the strongest and the best way to get to understand what might be particularly interesting about a company is to talk to someone who works there before you do an interview. So what we do in Trinity is we get our students to network with our alumni. So if a student has an interview with a company, what I'll do is I'll check who out of our alumni is working there, and I'll either invite them to talk to each other, or I'll get the student to reach out to them and send them an email and say, hey, I have an interview for this company. Would you be able to help me prepare? So if you can get that information from people that work in the company, it's so powerful, because they'll tell you about the culture. They'll tell you about all this information that you might not find on the website. So that's the best way to prepare for that question. With regards, why are you interested in this position? Again, I think it's good to really think about something that I think something that really you can connect with. So if you're going for a medical secretary role, ask yourself why is it that I'm really interested in this position? Like, for example, maybe you had a family relative who worked in the medical industry, and you learned a lot from speaking to them about the medical sector, and that you developed an interest in the medical sector as a consequence of that. And then also maybe you worked before in an admin role, and you really liked having the task, being, daily tasks that you needed to do. You also really enjoy being front of house, where you get to interact with customers or clients, that you get energized from interacting with people. So that combination of learning about the medical sector, enjoying admin tasks, and getting to interact with clients, customers, energizes you. So think about what really makes you interested in this position that you can really connect with, and be sure to tell them what that is. Like, for me, the reason I'm a guidance counselor is because I do find it rewarding helping people find careers that they find meaningful, that they find interesting. I can connect with that. That feels real to me. So in any interviews or whatever I'm asked, why do you do what you do? That's my answer. I find it rewarding helping people find careers that is going to bring them meaning in their lives. So whatever you can connect with, that's your best answer to that question of why are you interested in this position. Anything social related, like how do you build relationships with other people? How do you approach, like that question, how do you approach changing a colleague's opinion? That's a great question. Google love asking that question. How do you change someone's mind? But any social question, the answer should, I think, should always be as follows. The key to building relationships with people is making a genuine effort to understand their point of view. And that comes down to listening very carefully. We kind of live in an era where listening is perhaps a skill that a lot of us can work on. I don't know when if you think about the last time you were talking to someone and you thought, wow, they really are very good listeners. We do like to talk a lot, and there's a great book by a journalist called Kate Murphy called "You're Not Listening," and she talks about why listening is so important. And listening is where you build relationships. Or if anything, say they ask you, how do you deal with conflict? How do you deal with a difficult customer? Tell me about a time you had a disagreement. How did you resolve it? It all comes down to listening. Structure your answer around listening. So you say, the first thing I do is I listen to the other person to understand their point of view. And I find when I listen very carefully to other people's points of view, they feel valued. They feel like I'm taking an interest. And that brings down their defenses. That opens them up. That makes them more receptive. So I listen very carefully. And then when I feel they've finished, then I'll come back and give my own point of view. That's the critical thing for building relationships, or any relationship question is based around listening. Tell me about a time you had to meet tight deadlines. Really, this answer is very simple. And when you're working under pressure, you get that question, how do you cope under pressure? How do you work to tight deadlines? The best thing to do in that situation is say very simply, I always find keeping a list is the best way to stay on top of things. I was trained when I started my career is to do your to-do list the night before the end of a workday, so that when you come in the next day, you have your list of things in front of you, ready to go. So that's what I was coached to do. Also mentioned though, when working under pressure, it's important to strike a balance, to understand, to take breaks. I like, you might say I like to exercise, or I like to do yoga. Talk a little bit about how you engage in your self-care in order to make sure that you stay mentally in a good place when you're under pressure. So employers are really big on that these days. They talk a lot about work-life balance and mental well-being. So it's okay to say things like, if I'm a little bit stressed, I'll take a break, I'll go for a walk, I'll come back and I'll start with a fresh mind. So that's really how you answer that question. When it comes to your strengths and weaknesses, weakness obviously is a harder question to answer, but again, the critical thing here is that they want to see that you have self-awareness. That's why they ask the weakness question, because or like, why, if you fail, tell me about a time you failed and what you've learned from that. They're not hiring you to be perfect. What they're hiring you to do is to learn from the mistakes. Again, growth mindset. So being able to recognize that you make mistakes, and being able to explain, or to be able to convey to them that I understand that it's about learning from failure. That's what they're really interested in. And like one student said to me, if I'm asked that failure question, what should I say? And I said, well, tell me about a time that you really failed. And she said, well, I failed an entire year of college, and I had to do the year all over again. And she said, I really don't want to give that example though, because it's like I'm ashamed of it. And I said, well, actually, let's just tease this out. Okay, so you failed an entire year of college. What did you learn from that? And she went on to describe, well, God, it made me much more resilient. It taught me the value of being better prepared. I spent too much time having fun and not focusing on my studies. She listed out all of these bitter lessons that she learned from the experience, and it just showed how much she actually grew as a consequence of that mistake. And so we kind of said, well, actually, it's a really good example of how you developed as an individual, how you strengthened your character. So whatever the weakness is, it doesn't matter. It really just count. What really matters is that you're able to explain what you learned from that experience. So don't fear that question. Don't fear the failure question. Um, Use an example that is real to you. Tell them what you learned from it, and that's all you've got to do. Um, so what motivates you? Again, I think it's good to talk about like the soft skills. So if you say things like, what motivates me is working with people, helping people grow, building relationships with people. Also saying things like, I love being under pressure. What I love about administration is that it's really busy, and I really like that. I like having lots of things going on. I'm very task orientated. Um, so I like being busy. I like going in and having a busy day and be moving through lots of different things. That keeps me energized. So that's a good answer to that kind of question. So I'm just going to take a stop there for a second and just see if there's any questions, Betty, or if anybody wants to ask a question at this time.
There is no question in the
Okay, perfect. Well, guys, just jump in and ask a question if you've got one, because I'm conscious that I'm doing a lot of talking, so feel free to ask any questions. Also, at the end of an interview, what a lot of people struggle with is they say, "I don't know what to ask," um, and this can be tricky. And sometimes you might have a question or two that you want to ask, but it actually came up during the course of the interview, so now you're stuck. So, and it's good to have questions at the end because it can leave a good lasting impression. So here's a few examples of questions that you can put in your back pocket and you can ask if you're stuck. But I think the first question there, I'm curious to get your opinion on what you look for in a successful candidate. I shouldn't say and, just to say on what you look for in a successful candidate. If you spent the interview talking about, your how you motivate yourself, how you build relationships with people, how you manage your time, all of these soft skills that we looked at earlier on, and you ask this question at the end, I guarantee you the interviewer will say right back to you exactly the things you were talking about. We look for people who are self-motivated, who can build relationships, who can cope under pressure, who have a positive attitude. These are the people that we look to hire. So that you're going to get them telling you exactly what you told them when you ask that question. Another question is, I'm interested to hear more about your approach to management. How do you get the best out of your team? Very interesting thing that we can forget to do is when you go to an interview, they're interviewing you, but that works both ways. Many of you listening to this might have had an experience working with a manager who wasn't particularly good at what they do. There's a lot of line managers out there, and there's research to back this up that indicate that they don't actually add value. A lot of people go into management that aren't suited to management, and I think it's a good thing to just try and determine how emotionally intelligent is the manager who's interviewing you. So asking them what their approach to management is will give you a clue as to how good a manager they are. Because I think, like, if you're doing a tough job and you have a line manager who's empathetic, who cares about you, who is a coach and a mentor, and is genuinely interested in your development and growth, it makes your job so much easier, and you'll go into work every day thinking I'm supported. And Google learned this lesson themselves. They discovered that one of the most important things for a team to be successful is the morale, the how happy the team are working together. So I think that's a good question to ask. See what their approach to management is, and see if they've got that same mentality that you have, that they have that desire to build relationships and help you grow. And the last question there, I think, is a good question to ask is, what do you appreciate most about working in this company? So give them an opportunity to talk about what they love about working in the company. What do they like about their role in the company? We all like to talk, we all like to feel valued and to have our say. So when you get the interviewer sharing their experience about working in the company, it gets them opening up, and that causes that will create a sense of relationship between the two of you. So they have an opportunity to share their experience, and so that's a good way to get them talking about their background as well.
Paddy, we have some questions.
Sure, shoot.
So 1 second, I'll just go. We'll go backwards a little bit.
Yeah.
So Kasha is asking, will the example from education be sufficient? The example with the questions about deadlines.
Absolutely, absolutely. Like all the well, maybe 50% of the master's students that I coach for interviews, they might not have much experience at all. So it's all comes from their education, working in teams, working in groups. Like they might be doing sports and volunteering, and then they're doing their masters. So they're actually they've got a lot going on. So they're all good examples of multitasking, coping with pressure. So again, transferable skills, wherever you've learned to be organized or multitask, absolutely use your education. That's a really good example. And again, what I'd say is, so long as it feels real to you, it's much easier to be convincing if you feel like, yeah, that was really a time I was very busy. So whatever you can connect with.
Thank you, Paddy. I hope it answers Kasha. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Senada is asking, what if you don't cope well with stress? How do you explain that in the interview? How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, it's a very subjective thing. I mean, like I feel stress every day. So we're all stressed. And there's very good research around this that we are all stressed. So just remember that everyone's in that same position. But again, it comes back to how do you cope with stress? Like for me, I run every morning. That puts me in the right frame of mind, and then I have a diary to stay organized. So that's my main ways of coping with stress. I don't think you should go into an interview and say, I don't cope well with stress. I think you should go into the interview and you should say, this is how I cope with stress. Okay, so you say, yeah, I get stressed. This is the strategies I use for dealing with it, and explain how you deal with it. But I think that's the issue there is the terminology, the words you're using. I don't cope well with stress. No, just simply state, yes, I get stressed, and this is how I deal with it, and explain what those steps are. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Paddy. Dana is asking, how would you put on the interview table if I'm still recovering after a few years career break, but still a bit unwell physically, but very well mentally and energetical?
Absolutely. That's well, then you absolutely own that. You explain it. We've got someone on the MBA this year who's she's paralyzed from the waist down, and she runs her own company. She set up her own company, and she's amazing. She's incredible. She's actually she's quite a celebrity now. But she's set up this very successful company, and it hasn't stopped her. So I think again, it's about saying, it's like, tell me about a time when you went through a difficult period in your life. You could talk about that and say, I went through this process. It was very difficult, but this is what I've learned about it, and this is how it strengthened my character. And now I'm looking forward to getting my career back on track. Own it, talk about it. These are amazing stories about growth and development and how you have become more resilient. So talk to that. It's a really amazing example. I think that's my opinion.
Thanks, Paddy. We'll do one more, and maybe we'll let you continue and do more at the end. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So, thank you, Paddy. Mary is asking, should you prepare examples for competency-based interview?
Yes, yes, and again, just coming back to the examples, and I'll talk about it now in a second, but it's and this leads into this part quite well about like how you prepare for interviews. But yes, we think about the STAR technique. You know, you think about your situation, task, action, result. So, what I recommend doing is pick a question a day. So if you think about, you can go onto Google and you can type in competency-based questions. But Betty, I'm sure you share competency-based questions. The same
Yes, we've
questions.
been through that quite a lot. So
Yeah,
we prepare loads of them. I usually tell them have at least one ready for each competency, at least one.
yeah, absolutely. And but the really important thing I keep coming back to is that idea of being authentic, like that MBA who was struggling in her interviews. Like it was really interesting. She's very successful, but she really struggled in interviews because she wasn't being authentic. She wasn't picking examples that felt real to her. She was picking examples that she thought that somehow an employer would want to hear. But when she started focusing on examples that really she felt she could really resonate with, it changed everything for her. She was able to be much more convincing because it didn't feel contrived. She didn't feel like she was coming up with a rehearsed answer. She was like, so I said to her, look, give me an example of a time when you failed. What was a really true example? And she picked one and was like, yeah, that was tough. And I said, tell me about it. And she explained everything that happened and what she learned from it. And it was just so much more powerful than the kind of previous answers she was given. So examples, absolutely, but just keep coming back to what feels real to me. So the last part I just want to talk about is how you actually practice for interviews. What we typically do is we wait till we maybe get an invitation to interview a week from now, or maybe we'll go to one prep session with Betty or another employment guidance officer, and we spend maybe 45 minutes doing an isolated prep session. But the neuroscience shows us that the best way to actually prepare for whether it's an interview or anything really is to do little bits often. So and research here shows that it takes a bit of time to build a habit. But if you now are thinking, okay, in 2, 3 months, I'm going to start doing job interviews. Maybe the course. When does the course finish, Betty? Is it May, June?
It's finishing in the beginning of June.
Okay, beginning of June.
End of May, beginning of June, yes.
Okay, perfect. So we have like about 3 months, and the habit neuroscience shows that it takes about 3 months to actually develop a habit. But what I'd like you all to do is to start on a weekly basis, or maybe on every second day, you'll say, okay, I'm going to take one competency-based interview question, and I'm going to spend 10 to 15 minutes practicing answering it. Whether maybe when you're on the bus, when you're out for a walk, when you're just around the house doing housework, wherever. But just think, okay, it's Monday. I'm going to ask myself the question, um, how do I cope with pressure? How do I cope with stress? And then just think about times in your life when you're under stress, when you're under pressure, when you had a lot going on, and just think about that time, and then just imagine yourself answering that question in an interview. Just start thinking it out. And then once you've done it once, do it again, do it the third time. And that's it. It might take you 5 or 10 minutes, done. And then on Tuesday, pick another question, answer it in your head. Wednesday, another question, answer in your head. So each day, you just spend a small amount of time practicing each question. Then after a week or two, you've practiced it in your head, maybe write down the answer. Okay, so now you're externalizing your thought process. So you're writing it down. And then when your confidence is starting to build and you really feel like you've got a good example for a question that you can really connect with, and you think that's a really good example, record it on your phone. So say it out loud. I mentioned this last week, but what was really interesting for me during the lockdowns was I had to do all my presentations online, and I'd record them before sending them out to the students, but I'd have to listen to my presentations. And it was a really good learning experience for me because I got to see myself presenting. And it was difficult at the start. I was a bit kind of like, I didn't like looking at myself and listening to myself. But gradually over time, I started to get used to listening to my presentations, and I'd see how I could improve. And for any of you that are nervous about interviewing, this is a very, very powerful technique. When we're working with students who have got strong social phobias, we do this. We get them comfortable with an example, and then we record them and we get them to watch it back. And that really helps them to see themselves from a different point of view. So start recording yourself giving answers on your phone. There's a recording device on most phones or on your laptop, and watch yourself back. And I know that might sound difficult at the start, but it's a really good exercise. So practice rehearsing the answers in your head, write them down, then read them out loud, and then just do it naturally in your own words. And do that regularly, a couple of times a week between now and when the course finishes and you start doing interviews. And what that does is it creates neural pathways in your brain, so that like when you first think of an example to a question, you may not have been thinking about that very often. So you don't have a neural pathway set down in your brain. But as you practice it each day, that neural pathway goes from a very kind of like poorly defined path to like a super highway. So that when it comes to actually going to an interview, you've got a very clear line between the question and an example, and it just flows straight away out of your brain. And even though you might be nervous, that neural pathway is so strong that you can just recite that example really, really easily. So that's how we prepare. That's how we develop a habit. We do a little bit each day over a couple of months. So I think now is a great time to start practicing those little packets of homework each day.
Thanks a million, Patty. Another question on that line is from Kelly, that asks, if in an interview you are nervous and say your mouth dries up and it's obvious that you are struggling a bit with being nervous, would that be a turn off for the interviewer?
No, not at all. And I think what's really good as well is to say it. Just tell them I'm actually quite nervous, and it's something. See, the thing is, like the interviewers will connect with that. I One of the reasons why I'm saying be authentic is because it's really important to bring your humanity to the interview, to be the real you, and they'll appreciate that. And so I think when you're nervous, just tell them, and everyone will have a bit of a laugh, and it will take the stress out of the situation. So and also very important, have a glass of water. If they always ask for a glass of water if your mouth is dry, that's important.
Thanks a million. That actually happened to me when I went for an interview. It was my first time in Ireland going for one, so they actually had a glass of water in front of me. So they asked me, would you like me to open the window? And I was blushing, and they opened the window. I had a few sips of water, and everything was better then.
Yeah,
But we did
yeah.
have a laugh about it. So
Yeah,
it's
look,
an icebreaker.
it is like nervousness, stress. Being nervous is really like I have done a lot of research on this, and what happens when you're nervous is the front of your brain starts to shut down, and the front of your brain is where all your thinking is. That's where, so if you've ever been in an exam and you look at a question and you think, I know the answer to this, but I'm just drawing a blank. What's happening there is that you're entering the fight or flight system. So that's in your nervous system, that's the stress response. It's very, very helpful when you suddenly you're crossing the road and a car comes out of nowhere, and before you know it, you're on the pavement. That's the fight or flight system kicking in, and you need it. You can't play sports without it. It's a very helpful system, but that's actually what happens when we're nervous in an interview. The fight or flight system takes over, and it shuts down the thinking part of our brain. So it's harder for us to actually think of simple answers to questions. So when we get asked questions like, how do you build relationships with other people? And you kind of think, I know this, I just can't think of the answer. That's because you're in the stress response. And that's why we do the neuroscience of bedding in those neural pathways. Because by doing that now, by practicing answering the questions now, every week between now and when you're actually job hunting and interviewing, even when you're nervous, then those neural pathways will just naturally activate, and the answers will flow. So you won't even need to think about it. Like, I've had students come out of an interview and go, I can't really remember any of it, but I know it went well, and that's because just the neural pathways were there, firing away, doing their job. The other thing I think is really very helpful to cope with stress is to get exercise. I mentioned this last week. When we're stressed, we release a chemical, a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is what makes us stressed and anxious. When we exercise, and when I say exercise, exercise in a way that's healthy for you, everyone's got different levels of fitness, but if you get movement, if you get exercise, if you get a sweat on the morning of an interview, that reduces cortisol levels and it increases endorphins. So you have increased endorphins, which is the feel good hormone, and you reduce the stress hormone cortisol. So that's a really powerful way. Like, before any major presentation, I always exercise. I just wouldn't go into a big presentation without it, because I know what it does to my brain and how it settles me down. Sorry, I hope that
That's
was a
brilliant.
long
Thanks.
answer.
No, that's excellent. Can you take a few more questions, Paddy?
Yeah, I've got plenty of time. Yeah.
Yeah. So Yonela and Kira, they have similar questions. Yonela asked, should you apply for a job that clearly states that you need certain years experience, but you don't have them, but you really feel that you can do that job? And then Kira asks, hi Paddy, I was wondering how best to put yourself forward for a career change. I have experience and the skills, but I'm coming from a very different background.
Yeah, I get you. So the really important thing is, and the first person made a good point there, they're looking at the job description and they really feel that they're good for that role. If you have that feeling, you should go for it. Again, our gut instinct, we know now from neuroscience, is a really important decision maker that you should listen to. We live in an era where we're very much rational. We think about, well, if it makes rational sense, but actually gut instinct is just as important. So if you really do feel that a job is right for you, you should apply. Give the line manager the opportunity to look at your CV. The worst case scenario is that they don't invite you for interview. We're kind of going into the CV area here, but just briefly, what matters is that you construct a really powerful argument through your CV, explaining to them, this is why I feel I'm right for this role. So put your case across and take that chance, because you never know. The second question, Betty, was, what was it again? Sorry.
Um,
Career
about, so
change.
basically, yeah, so Kira feels that she has experience and skills, but she's coming from a different background. So
Yeah.
Kira, would you like to say more about it? Because I know you've been in touch with Paddy as well.
Hi, sorry
Hi,
guys.
Kira. Yeah.
I just moved out of the room. I have my little girl here sick, and she's she's listening to nursery rhymes. So yeah, I'm coming from a background in healthcare, and I've worked in industry and a few different type of jobs. But I'm really looking to get into education, and education is something that I've done as part of, I guess, every role that I've had. And I've tried, I guess, in my CV to portray that, but it's just I am a bit concerned about when that question comes up, if I were to get to interview, why are you making this change?
Well, the question is, why are you making the change?
So I guess for me, it's the education is something that I've been passionate about throughout all of the roles that I've done. And I have always kind of driven for best practice and improvement kind of in everything that I've worked in. And I felt that if I was to get a role, meeting with the younger healthcare students now, or people who are actually going into it, wouldn't that be one of the best ways to kind of drive those improvements and best practices to kind of inspire them?
Yeah. Yeah, okay, that's really good. Was there an experience or before that kind of opened up your mind to education? Is there anything that you kind of think, wow, that was a moment where I thought that could be a future for me?
Um, I think I've had a few of those experiences,
Yeah.
but definitely when I was there was one company that I was working with, and we put together a nurse education program, and from that I was speaking to Betty about it. There was a kind of a change and improvement that was introduced, like nationally, hospital or kind of hospital wide in the throughout the HSE.
Hmm.
And I felt just really wonderful to have kind of been part of that and to have
Hmm.
driven that. And it was through the education that we provided that this change happened. So it was just very inspiring, I guess. That for me was one of the best experiences, I think.
Okay. So that you see then the way you were talking there, like you could sense the passion, you could sense the, that real feel that you really it really impacted you, that experience. And that's the authenticity that I was referring to earlier on. Like, and I think when that the most important thing is that the interviewer gets a sense of where your passion is coming from, and and that's the critical thing. So I think you absolutely have the passion and the interest, and that's what you focus on. Now, the other thing is as well is like when you job interview, you get market information. You come out like this is what I say to the students as well. It's like when you engage in job hunting, it's not just about getting a job. It's about research. You go to an interview and then you come out and you kind of go, oh, now I know where my gaps are, or you send a CV to a job and you don't get an interview, but you might ask the recruiter, what areas do I need to work on? And they say, well, if you get this, this, and this, then you'll probably get an interview. So you talk to recruitment agencies, you send CVs, you go to interviews, and you get feedback from the market as to where you're strong, where you need to improve. So I think, like Akira, have you sent any CVs yet, or have you done any interviews in the education sector?
I just recently sent a job application, kind of it was an online application, and my CV I'm trying to shorten it down at the moment, Paddy, because it's far too long.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. So yeah, so I think we're actually meeting, aren't we? Next week, is it?
Yeah, I think it's the first week of March.
First week of March, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, that would be great. We'll go through it. But yeah, your CV should be no more than 2 pages. Even Facebook and Google are sort of pushing towards 1 page. So I'm not sure how long your CV is, but I think it's about engaging with the market and going to interviews, see where the gaps are, and then fill those gaps with training or whatever it needs to be. But we can talk about that then in our meeting in March.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thanks a million, Patty. We are kind of hit 10:30 here. Do we have time for one more question? Or
I do, yeah. I actually put 15 minutes aside on so it's okay.
Oh, fantastic. So Dana is asking, how can I improve myself and keep myself up if after a few interviews no one calls me back and I have one feedback only? Because with no feedback, how can I know what I have to work on to improve myself in the interviews? Or their messages are, we chose someone else this time, we will keep your CV for future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this person is getting interviews, or
Yes.
yeah. That's where the debrief session, like I don't know, Betty, if you do like debriefs, like where I think as soon as you come out of an interview, take out pen and paper and write down everything that you felt went well and what you felt went poorly, and go talk to your if it's Betty or whoever.
Yes.
Yeah, have a call with them.
Yes.
Have a
I always
call.
ask for feedback. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Feedback. Yeah.
yeah. Do it, like get on it, jump on a video call and just say, okay, Betty, these are the things I think I did well. These are the things I might have improved on. Do a brainstorm as quickly as possible. Or just tell Betty, look, this is everything I remember from the interview. And then Betty will say, okay, well, what did you say for this question? What did you say for this question? And I find when I do that, I'll usually identify areas that were perhaps falling down a little bit. I always look for, like when I meet with students, I always look for where's the problem happening? Are they sending lots of CVs but not getting any interviews? Okay, well then there's something wrong with the CV. Are they getting interviews but not getting offers? Okay, so there's something wrong with the strategy in the interviewing. So we'll look at that. But I think the debrief is so important because you're right. Employers don't give feedback, which I think is disappointing. I think they should. But the best way to do is debrief, brainstorm, write everything down, jump on a call with Betty, and look at the things that look at everything generally and see where you did well and what you can improve on. That's the only way you can really do it, you know. Yeah.
Thanks a million, Paddy. And sometimes the issue is when people send the same CVs to all the organizations they find out there without tailoring it and without the right keywords.
Yeah, like
yeah,
we could do a session on the CV as well, but like your CV is a call to action. You know, your CV should make the reader curious about you. Like they look at your CV and they think, "Ooh, wow, they could be very good for this role." And the only way to do that is to ensure that your CV addresses the job description. That you look at the job description, you identify the 3 key criteria, and in your personal summary at the top of your CV, you are directly addressing the key issues. Like you're getting straight in there and saying, "This is how I will be good for this role. This is how I can solve your problem." Too often I find CVs are far too generic. They got all these sentences like, "I can work well on my own or as part of a team. I can work well under pressure." But those statements on their own don't really mean anything. You need to be tangible. Remember, your CV is a sales document, and you think of the employer like a customer, and you're trying to sell the most important product you'll ever sell, which is yourself. So you're selling yourself to this customer. You don't get to walk in there and talk to them. They're only going to see the CV. So the CV needs to be a really powerful document that tells the employer, the customer, why you are good for that role. So be specific and address the job description.
Thanks a million, Paddy. There is another question there from Kasha referring to the questions you ask the employers. And I think she referred to the last question. The question about management style. Is it not a bit like asking the interviewer 2 personal questions? It sounds like asking them about their personal opinion.
No, it's not. It's just saying, you know, I'm interested to know how you approach management. How do you get the best out of your team? They're the exact same questions they're going to be asking you. Like they're going to be asking you, how do you cope with pressure? Tell me about a time you failed. That's quite a personal question. It cuts both ways. You are entitled to ask these questions of them. I know I did a workshop with the MBAs, and 2 of the MBAs told myself and the rest of the class that the last 2 jobs or so that they worked in, they asked that they come in for a full day just to see how the team works. So they want to, and the employer agreed. So they went in and spent a whole day just observing the team dynamic because they wanted to see if it was going to be an environment they felt they would work well in. So that's another step up, saying before I accept the job, I want to spend a day in there watching you all work. So I was like, wow, that's really impressive. I hadn't thought of that. So that's another example. So no, you're entitled to ask these questions. This person is going to be your boss. You know, you're going to go in there every day and they're going to be telling you what to do for 8 hours a day. You're entitled to know a bit about them as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Paddy. Any other questions? That's all in the chat.
Okay, great.
So if you guys have any other questions, or maybe someone from Gillian's group there, they want to ask anything.
Actually, no, we're just all saying how brilliant it was. So we don't have any questions. I suppose I probably have just one question.
Sure.
The, you know, like video interviews, is there any kind of, I know you can Google it and you can get a generic sort of to-dos, but is there anything that you could suggest? Or I just noticed like your background is blank there. Is that kind of the norm now? Keep everything sort of blank in the background and a headshot kind of.
Yeah, it is. And knowing that you are, I think the biggest thing is knowing that you are on your own in that space, that you're not as I remember I was giving a presentation last year, and just before I started, the neighbors started drilling. And the noise was unbelievable. I had to go next door. I'd be like, please, I'm about to start a presentation. Please shut up. So the most important thing actually I find is knowing that you are in a space where you will not be distracted for the next 45 minutes. But yes, blank background, making sure you're wearing just a shirt or something quite relatively formal, and it's just your head. Now, actually, one very good point as well is we took training from professional actors actually when we first started the lockdown on how to present online. And now I might be breaking all the rules here, I'm not sure, but they said that you should have a source of light coming from behind the laptop rather than having light behind me, which would just cast a shadow of my face, so you wouldn't be able to see my face properly. So the light should come from the front. It should be a window in front of the laptop, not behind. That's an important thing because you want them to be able to see your face clearly. So that's just one other important thing to state.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, thanks. Great.
Thanks, Gillian, for that. Paddy, I have a question. We had a few students that recently went for interviews in IKEA. But what they do in IKEA, if you know anything about that, they do the preset, pre-recorded interviews.
What are they called? Sorry.
Pre-recorded, so they get the questions and they have to answer in a specific time. Could you say anything about that?
Yeah, they do that a lot with the grad programs as well. The same questions seem to come up time and time again with the pre-recorded. Usually it's like, why do you want to work for IKEA? Why do you want to work in this position? And then they ask maybe a competency-based question like, give me an example of a time or when you worked with the public, because IKEA would be very much kind of working with the public. And again, I would say the best thing to do here, if you have recorded interviews with IKEA, whoever it is, record yourself. Goes back to the recording. Use your smartphone, have it on your laptop, record yourself answering the questions. Think it out in your head first, write it down, and then record yourself just reading the answer, if that makes you feel more comfortable. And then when you feel comfortable, just record yourself in your own words and time it, because they usually only give you 2 minutes. So you time yourself just explaining out loud, I want to work for IKEA because, so that's the best way to prepare, because it's kind of weird recording yourself. Like a lot of people say it's kind of uncomfortable. So by recording yourself, you get comfortable with that. And again, the neuroscience, you generate this neural pathway that gets comfortable, so it becomes more automatic.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paddy. Thanks a million for that.
No problem.
Are there any more questions or? No? Okay.
Okay. So I think that the key things, be authentic, use examples that are real to you. And it's much easier to sell yourself when you're talking about examples that you can really connect with. Remember, growth mindset. Mistakes are absolutely, like, the seeds of success begin in failure. So look at failure like a good thing. You learn from it. Remember, grit, just a perseverance. Start interviewing as early as you can, and keep interviewing. You have a bad interview, come out, look at what you did wrong, growth mindset, and put yourself out there again. That's the grit side of it. Practice a little bit often. So maybe Monday to Friday, 1 question per day, only takes 10 minutes. If we sit down and if we say, oh, tomorrow I'm going to do 2 hours of interview prep, that's very overwhelming for your brain. And typically we might do it once, but then we won't do it again. So it's much easier to just do a little bit often, 1 question a day. While I'm walking to the bus stop, I'm going to rehearse it in my head. That adds up over a couple of weeks and maybe even a month or 2. And you develop those neural pathways, so the answers just start to flow really easily.
Brilliant. Yeah,
They're
so
the
it
key
takes
things.
a bit of discipline as well.
Yeah, but if it's tiny little packages, if you just say, I'm just going to spend 10 minutes today practicing interviewing one question, your brain says, oh, okay, I can deal with that, as long as it's not 45 minutes. So it's much easier, the neuroscience shows, it's much easier just do a little bit each day. And then when you do get an interview invitation and you've got a week, then you'll really focus and you might spend half an hour a day or 45 minutes or whatever it is. But just for now, just a little bit most days of the week.
That's fantastic. Excellent. Thank you so much, Paddy. We really, really appreciate that. That was excellent.
Great. Good. Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for coming along. It was really good to present, like I said. And Betty, if we want to do something on CVs or whatever, and so